The morning of Julia Hartwell's college graduation, she ironed her robe twice. Not because it needed it, because her hands needed something to do. She had rehearsed this day in her mind for 4 years, the walk across the stage, the handshake with Dean Calloway. The moment she turned to find her parents in the crowd, her mother's hand pressed to her chest the way it always was when she was proud. Her father standing straight, with that slow, deliberate nod he reserved for moments that mattered. She had carried that image through 2 jobs, 3 roommates, 4 winters of eating rice and canned soup because the scholarship didn't cover everything, and asking for help felt like surrender. She had earned this day the hard way, completely alone. Julia was 22, the first in her family to graduate from a 4-year university. She had studied communications at the University of Michigan, graduating summa cum laude with a thesis on media ethics that her professor, Dr. Renata Osei, had called the most sophisticated student work I've read in 15 years. She was sharp, composed, and quietly fierce, the kind of woman who kept her pain in a locked drawer and her ambitions written in a journal she never showed anyone. Her parents, Dale and Carol Hartwell, lived 40 minutes away in Dearborn, not 4 hours, not in another state, 40 minutes. She had mailed them the invitation in January. She had texted in March to confirm. She had called 2 weeks before, and her mother had said, "We'll be there, Jules. Wouldn't miss it." She believed her. That was the worst part. She had genuinely believed her. The Chrysler Center was packed with families, thousands of them. Balloons, flowers, grandmothers in Sunday dresses, fathers with video cameras held too high. Julia walked in with her classmate Dana, who had her entire extended Filipino family filling an entire row, cousins holding a hand-painted banner that read, "We love you, Dana," in red block letters. Julia had saved 2 seats, row J center section. She had texted the seat numbers that morning. By the time the processional began, both seats were still empty. She told herself traffic. She told herself parking. She told herself the 100 small, reasonable disasters that swallow ordinary mornings. She walked across the stage when her name was called Julia Ann Hartwell, Communications, summa cum laude, and she shook Dean Calloway's hand, and she smiled, genuinely smiled, because she had worked for this and no one could take that. But her eyes swept the crowd once, twice, and found nothing. After the ceremony, she stood outside in the May sunlight in her cap and gown, watching other families collapse into each other. Tears and laughter and bouquets of flowers, and someone's little brother sitting on someone's shoulders. Dana's mother was weeping and fanning her face simultaneously. Julia's phone buzzed at 2:47 p.m. It was her mother. "Something came up with your Aunt Patricia. We couldn't make it, sweetheart. We'll celebrate soon. Proud of you." That was it. No call, no voicemail, 10 words and a period. Julia read the message 3 times. Then she put her phone in her pocket, walked to her car, a 2009 Civic with a cracked dashboard, sat down, closed the door, and cried for exactly 11 minutes. She knew the time because she was watching the clock, the way you do when you're trying to contain something that wants to become infinite. Then she stopped, wiped her face, started the engine. Something had shifted inside her. Not broken, shifted, like a bone that sets wrong, and the body quietly, permanently adjusts around it. She drove home alone. She ate leftovers. She did not call them back. She opened her journal to a blank page and wrote 1 sentence at the top. "I will build something they cannot ignore." 3 days after graduation, Julia learned what had come up. Her cousin Megan posted photos on Instagram, a backyard barbecue at Aunt Patricia's house in Livonia, streamers, a cake. Her parents were in every 3rd picture. Her father grilling in his University of Michigan apron, her mother laughing with a glass of white wine, comfortable and loose, and the way people are when they're exactly where they want to be. The event, Aunt Patricia's boyfriend's birthday. Not an emergency, not a hospitalization, Not anything that held even the silhouette of urgency. A birthday party. Julia sat with her phone in her lap for a long time. She wasn't crying. She was past crying. She was sitting somewhere deeper and quieter than grief. The still, cold room that opens up when you realize the injury was never accidental. She called her mother that evening. Carol answered on the third ring, her voice bright and unsuspecting. "Jules, how are you doing?" "I saw the photos," Julia said. Her voice was completely level. "From Aunt Patricia's." Silence. Then, It's not what it looks like, sweetheart." "What does it look like?" More silence. Then, her mother did something Julia would never fully forgive. She pivoted. "You know, you've always been so sensitive about things like this. Your father and I do so much for you, and sometimes family obligations." "I graduated Summa Cum Laude," Julia said quietly. 40 minutes away." "Julia." She hung up. Her father called back within minutes. Dale Hartwell was a man of compressed emotions and deflected accountability, a man who had spent Julia's entire childhood solving problems by making them someone else's fault. His opening line was, "Your mother is very upset right now." "Okay," Julia said. "You need to understand that Patricia has been going through a lot." "Dad." Her voice did not waver. "I don't need you to explain it. I just need you to know that I heard you. What you said without saying anything." "Julia, you're being dramatic." She hung up again. What followed was 6 months of a particular kind of silence. Not estrangement exactly, but a careful, deliberate distance. Holiday dinners where her father made jokes too loudly, and her mother refilled wine glasses with anxious frequency, and no one mentioned graduation because the topic had been silently agreed to be dangerous. Julia showed up when required, smiled when expected, and said nothing. But she was also watching. She watched how her parents spoke about success always in terms of other people. Her cousin Ryan, who had connections. Her mother's colleague, whose daughter had married well. Success, in her parents' framework, was something that arrived through proximity to the right people, not through the grinding, solitary labor Julia had always known. They had never, she realized, believed she would become anything significant on her own. That was why they hadn't come. Not negligence. Not Aunt Patricia. Not a scheduling conflict buried under good intentions. They simply hadn't thought it mattered enough. The realization landed in Julia's chest, like a stone dropped in deep water. No splash, just descent. She let it sink. She let it settle. And in the settling, something in her calcified into absolute, unbreakable resolve. She opened her laptop that night and emailed Dr. Osei about a job opportunity she'd been hesitant to pursue, a junior content strategist position at The Current, a fast-growing digital media company in Chicago. She had been waiting to feel ready. She stopped waiting. Julia moved to Chicago on a Thursday in November with 2 suitcases, a box of books, and $1,400 in her checking account. She told no one in her family except a single text to her mother. "I'm moving to Chicago for work. I'll let you know when I'm settled." No response came for 4 days. When it did, it was, "That's exciting. Be safe." The smiley face almost made her laugh. The Current was young and aggressive and chaotic, in the way that all good media companies are ideas flying across open offices, everyone overworked and somehow galvanized by it. Julia was hired to write and manage content strategy for their lifestyle vertical. She was good at it immediately. Within 3 months, she was running the vertical alone. Within 6, she had tripled its traffic. Her editor, a sharp Texan named Margot Webb, noticed, "You have instincts most people spend a decade developing," Margot told her one evening over takeout boxes and analytics dashboards. Where did that come from? Julia considered the question honestly. "I learned very early that no one was going to notice me unless I made it impossible not to." She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. At night, in her studio apartment in Wicker Park, She built what she privately called the architecture. Not a revenge plan in any crude sense, nothing theatrical, nothing that required confrontation. What Julia was constructing was a life so undeniable, so documented, so publicly visible that the people who had underestimated her would eventually have to reckon with what they had dismissed. This required patience, true patience, not the suppressed, white-knuckled kind, but the deep patience of someone who has accepted that time is a structural element, not an obstacle. She started a newsletter, the Hartwell Dispatch, a media criticism column that grew from 400 subscribers to 40,000 in 14 months. She wrote about authenticity in storytelling, about the psychology of narrative, about what it means to be seen in a world engineered for distraction. People shared it because it felt like she was writing directly to something they'd never been able to name. She did not post about her personal life. No family photos, no hometown references. She was building a public identity with surgical intentionality, and nostalgia had no place in the blueprint. The moral conflict arrived quietly, as it always does. Some nights she sat at her window looking at the city lights and asked herself whether this was still about becoming or whether it had curdled into something else. Whether the woman in her journal, the one who wrote, "I will build something they cannot ignore," had been reaching toward herself or toward the moment her parents' faces changed when they realized what they had undervalued. She couldn't always tell. She kept building anyway, because by now the architecture had taken on its own logic, its own momentum, and some structures, once begun, must be completed. 14 months after moving to Chicago, Julia was offered the position of Director of Digital Strategy at The Current. She was 24 years old. She accepted on a Wednesday. On Thursday, a profile of her ran in Media Week, a trade publication her father subscribed to, because he worked in regional advertising and considered it professional reading. The headline read, "Julia Hartwell, 24, is quietly reshaping how digital media thinks about audience." The article included a photo, her name, her hometown, the University of Michigan degree. She had not tipped off Media Week. Margot had. Julia found out after the fact and felt something she couldn't immediately categorize. Not quite satisfaction, not quite dread. Something more ambivalent and precise. Her phone began ringing that Saturday morning. Her mother called first, then twice more, then her father, then her Aunt Patricia, which was almost artistic in its irony. Julia did not answer. She let the calls accumulate for 3 days, 12 in total. Increasingly urgent voicemails she listened to, with the phone held slightly away from her ear, as if the distance were a form of protection. Her mother's voice moved through confusion, then excitement, then a warmth so sudden and unearned it made Julia's jaw tighten. "Sweetheart, we always knew you had it in you. We are just so proud." Her father's voicemail was characteristically transactional. "That's a big deal, Jules. Call your mother. She's excited." Julia's plan had never involved a dramatic confrontation. She had thought about it the cinematic version, the dinner table reckoning, the moment where she laid every grievance out in the open air and watched them falter. She had written that scene in her journal and then crossed through it with a single line. Too loud, too much like asking for something. Instead, she called her mother back on a Tuesday evening. She was standing at her kitchen counter, drinking tea, completely unhurried. "Julia!" Carol's voice was bright as a new coin. "We've been trying to reach you. That article, honey. Your father showed everyone at his office." "That's nice," Julia said. "We want to celebrate. Maybe come home for a weekend. Or we can come to Chicago. We've never seen your apartment." "Mom," Julia kept her voice even, warm, even. "This was the most important part. I'd love that. I want to show you what I've built." A pause. "Really? Really? I want you to see it." She could hear her mother's relief like an exhale through the phone. The narrative Carol was constructing in her head, the misunderstanding resolved. The daughter returned. The family unified around the reflected glory of her success was so vivid, Julia could practically see it. "Next month," Julia said, "I'll plan something." She did plan something, carefully. She arranged for her parents to visit on the same weekend. The Current was hosting its annual media summit, an event attended by editors, executives, and journalists from across the industry. She arranged for Margot to introduce her to the room. During the opening remarks, she ensured her parents had seats in the third row. She wore a charcoal blazer and said nothing that wasn't completely true. She simply let them watch. The morning after the summit, Julia had breakfast with her parents at a restaurant in the West Loop. Dale Hartwell was unusually quiet. Carol talked too much, filling every silence with brightness, the way people do when they're managing an emotion they haven't yet identified. "Over eggs and coffee," her father said. "You've done well, Julia, really well." "Thank you," she said. "We always believed in you," her mother added. Julia set down her cup. She looked at her mother, at the carefully maintained warmth on Carol's face, the genuine pride sitting just below a layer of something more complicated, something that looked almost like guilt but wasn't quite willing to announce itself. "Mom," she said, "do you remember graduation day?" The table went still. "Jules," her father started. "I'm not angry," Julia said, and she meant it. That was the thing she hadn't expected. Somewhere between building the architecture and standing on a stage in front of 300 media professionals while her parents watched from the third row, the anger had finished its work and moved on. What remained was something more like clarity. "I just want you to know that I remember it and that it mattered." Her mother's eyes went wet. She opened her mouth and closed it. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," Julia continued. "I'm saying it because I spent a long time building something to make you see me. And standing here right now, I realize—" She paused, choosing the words carefully. "I built it for me. Not for this moment. Not for you. For me. And I think I need to say that out loud so I can stop waiting for it to feel like enough." Carol reached across the table and took Julia's hand. Dale stared at the table for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were different, stripped of the usual deflection. "We got it wrong," he said. It was the most unguarded thing she had ever heard him say. "Yes," Julia agreed. "You did." They ate the rest of breakfast mostly in silence, and it was not the silence of unresolved things, but of things that had been said and could not be unsaid and were simply being absorbed. Walking out of the restaurant alone, she had her own cab, her own schedule, her own city. Julia paused for a moment on the sidewalk. She thought about the girl who had ironed her graduation robe twice, who had saved 2 seats, who had driven home alone in a car with a cracked dashboard and cried for exactly 11 minutes. She thought about all the years she had believed that the right kind of success would finally make her legible to the people who should have always been able to read her. Here was the truth she hadn't expected. They had come. They had seen. They had said they were proud. And it had felt like almost nothing. Not because it was too late. Not because the wound was too deep. But because she had already, without fully realizing it, given herself everything she had once needed from them. And you cannot receive as a gift what you have already given yourself. She got in the cab. The city moved past the window in long, indifferent streaks of light. The most devastating thing about finally being seen, she thought, is discovering that you no longer needed it.